right, and everything looks like it's doing okay. Fantastic. All right, just to check everybody, can everybody hear me? Just a little thumbs up to the screen if you can, just to make sure that we're all happy days and you can actually hear me, which which is a good thing. Otherwise, this workshop would be a bit useless otherwise. So I'd just like to say to everybody, thank you very much for attending today, because for me personally, as an astronomer, this is a very exciting opportunity where I will be virtually launching my astronomy organization, Space4All, which is to actively promote practical astronomy and to engage members from all backgrounds. And so what I'm hoping to do today is to teach just that, the basics of astronomy, the thing which I believe so many people are looking for nowadays in looking up at the night sky. And something which I think is so important. And like with astronomers who I know who've joined me on this workshop today, that the past year, the night sky has connected us more than ever during these weird, strange, unprecedented times. And for me, I think that is the most important thing, because it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter where you may be. The night sky is what connects all of us, whether that be looking at the moon, looking at the major constellations. It's such an amazing place, to which I realize why it's so important for it to be protected for future generations. And that's what I'm trying to do, is just that. With this badge over here, Space4All, that is what I'm trying to achieve, is to get as many of us interested in looking up at the night sky, like what we're going to achieve this evening, to learn the basics of identifying some of the major constellations, to begin your adventure into the universe. And how I've choreographed the series of virtual events in the coming year is to gradually work up the steps. So we're doing major constellations this evening. We'll take the next step, which is to look at the planets. And then eventually, I hope to get all you guys using telescopes and binoculars and everything. So that's my ambition, is just so that we can all connect through the stars on so many ways. And to be honest, I'll be honest with you, I'll just say it now. This is something which I wish I could have had when I was a youngster. Because, you know, for those of you who know me, Josh Dury, that I started my astronomy journey back when I was 7 years old. And since then, I've joined astronomy organizations and participated in raising public awareness of light pollution. And all these things are so important to realize how important the night sky is in our modern society, which we see today. And hopefully this will do just that. So I'm seeing we've got a couple more people joining in. So we've got a really good turnout tonight. This is fantastic. So again, I just want to thank everybody who's joining in the talk. We'll join momentarily and begin the talk. Until then, I'll just wait for any final few people to join in, and then we will begin our presentation. So in the meantime, then, some of the things I can say is that if it wasn't for the bad weather, which we have got at the minute, I was hoping to do a real-time live stream of myself showing you guys from the comfort of your own homes, the constellations themselves. However, for those of you who may or may not know in the world, which is astronomy, you need a clear sky. And unfortunately, that isn't the case today, but I'm going to present it in a slightly different way with a slight different flavor and teach you some of those major constellations, which you can see in the night sky. So I'll be going to the basics. So let's see how we're doing. I think, what time are we on now, chaps? We're on 5 minutes past 7. So I think we will begin. So just excuse me temporarily as I set up the slide and to get this working. So I just want to say hello to anybody who may be watching on social media as well, on Facebook and YouTube, just whilst I get this sorted out. Okay, and then we will begin the presentation. So, wait for this one to load momentarily. Okay, and just a couple of things to say, guys. Just give me thumbs up if you can see a massive Space4All logo with some pretty stars saying Virtual Astronomy Workshop and the major constellations. Yes, I love it when technology works, don't you? So, today we will be talking about the major constellations in my first online workshop for Space4All. So we'll just get this slide working. Okay, so first of all, I think it's really important to realize what my ambitions are for this astronomy organization. And as I've said to you guys already, I wish to promote practical astronomy and to engage members from all backgrounds. So what I've done is I've choreographed a short film just to highlight some of the themes which we'll be covering today and what I hope to achieve as an astronomer with my astronomy organization. My name's Josh Dury, and I am the founder of Space4All. Space4All is an astronomy organisation to actively promote practical astronomy and to engage members from all backgrounds. In recent years, I have seen a growing demand for those wishing to look up at the night sky. Now couldn't be a more important time to observe the night sky. In light of the climate emergency, we are seeing the effects of light pollution and mega satellite constellations impact our view of the night sky. And within the next 5 years, our view of the night sky will change. I am very much an advocate whereby we must be inspired by something in order to protect it. And this is why I'm creating a series of YouTube videos to teach you guys at home how to observe the night sky. I would just like to say thank you very much for your interest in Space4All. Please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to our social media channels to follow our latest work. And here's to clear skies and all the best. So that's a flavour of what I hope to achieve with Space4All. So moving on to the next slide. Just excuse me 1 second whilst I sort this. Okay. Right, so as I mentioned then, just before going into the main part of this talk, this is what I want to do, is to engage within practical astronomy and the basics of astronomy and stargazing, and raising public awareness of light pollution as well as satellite constellations, as you can see, which have the potential to change our vision of the night sky within what is now the next 4 years, in between now and the year 2025. And most importantly, and this is why I think Zoom is so amazing, because I'm just looking at all of you guys across the screen now, and I've known like quite a lot of you guys like from different parts of the world, and it's just lovely the fact that using technology now, we can connect in a manner which we weren't so familiar with just over a year ago. So even though the pandemic has changed our vision of the cosmos and how we live our daily lives, I think it's so amazing to keep all connected through this software. So it's really lovely, and just lovely to see all your lovely faces. So moving on then, some quick instructions just before we begin. Can I just ask if everybody could please mute themselves before the workshop begins? It's totally optional. If you like to keep your videos on or off, that is totally up to you. But also what I thought could be fun maybe at the end is I'll ask you guys to unmute yourselves and we can have a bit of a Q&A discussion and have a chat with other members who are on the call. And also just to say, guys, if you've got an option, which you should, to the chat tool, if you have any questions, please could you put question then followed literally by your question so that I can filter through that in the discussion and then hopefully answer all of your lovely questions. Otherwise, you guys are pretty familiar, I'm sure, with the raise your hand tool if you wish to speak as well. So I think that's pretty much everything. So I will now begin with the talk. The major constellations. So I think this is such a lovely part of astronomy because, you know, for those of you who are beginning out and you're wishing to look up at the heavens, you may not currently have a telescope yet, or you're just thinking, getting a bit curious, thinking, well, I'm interested looking at the stars and I love looking at just the heavens themselves, looking at the universe. And the most important thing is you do not need a telescope to view the constellations. You just need a clear night and dark sky. That's all you need, a clear sky and somewhere dark. So beginning then, the beginnings of the constellations. It's very interesting, really, how the major constellations themselves showed up, in a sense, and how we become to realize what the constellations were in realizing our open window to the cosmos. Now, one of the ways I always like to help members remember, quite literally, the constellations themselves is from Greek mythology. Now, there are some of you guys who I can see here in the chat today who definitely know their stuff about the constellations and what to see in the night sky. But most importantly for me as an astronomer, if you've gone into the heavy reading, which is Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, and let me tell you, it is some very deep reading. If you want something to occupy your time, it's very interesting. But the most important aspect is the relationship to the major constellations themselves. And how at a time when Homer was writing his epics, that the constellations were used to understand our place in the universe, told by places of myth and legend, and how we observe the characters of the night sky. So going into some of the basics of the constellations themselves, I'm sure you guys know what this constellation is, and this is one known as Ursa Major. And from across the world, it takes on so many meanings, whether that be the Big Dipper, the plough, or the saucepan, however you may know it. But what's, I think, for me, was the most interesting thing to remember about Ursa Major is that when we see this traditional pan shape, and I'll just point this out using my mouse on my screen, is that we're only seeing one part of this constellation. And I think it's very obvious that you can see that this is actually the shape of a saucepan, but it's something much greater. It is the third largest constellation visible in the night sky in the Northern Hemisphere. And Ursa Major itself refers to the Great Bear. And as I'll go on to, some of you may realize the smaller bear as well. And what I find really interesting is that if you join up the stars in the night sky, you'll begin to see the legs of the bear and the arms of it as well. And the most important thing to remember about looking for the most obvious constellation in the Northern Hemisphere where we live is that it is due north in the night sky. And it's very easily recognizable by the 7 bright stars which make up the saucepan. And what is interesting, I'll go into more discussions about this, and please feel free to ask questions if any of this seems to blow over your head. But this constellation is very important for terms of navigation, because by ancient seafarers, they relied, like with farmers, on Ursa Major because it was able to tell the seasons. And why was this? This was all to do with the orientation of how we see the plough, Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, however we may know it. And the reason is because, as we will go along in this talk, so just hold on a minute, but this constellation never rises or sets. And why? Because of its close proximity to what is known as the North Celestial Pole. So the North Celestial Pole is a region in where we can see from the northern latitudes where the stars appear not to move very much, purely because of the axis in which the Earth is rotated. So when we look towards this region in space, that vision doesn't seem to change very much. And in doing so, from our perception of the way we see the stars, we can see Ursa Major rotate across the night sky. It never rises or sets. Okay, so this literally means that these constellations are called circumpolar, which is just that. So if there's one takeaway aspect from tonight, guys, that circumpolar constellations are those which will never rise or set above the horizon. Now, for astronomers like myself who look up to the heavens all night long, we use these constellations for some very important ways. And one of them is to observe the beauty, which is the night sky. So as you can see, what I've done here on this little display is taken some of my favorite, what are called deep sky objects. And I will go into a talk into this later on in my series of workshops, but deep sky objects can be absolutely anything relating to objects which could be thousands, if not millions, of light years from Earth. So this could be galaxies, nebulas, star clusters, all these exciting, bold, and just purely visually stunning objects, which we can eventually use a telescope to find objects within the night sky. So just to highlight on some of these then, for those of you who are just beginning out and thinking, wow, the night sky, the constellations, what can I do in order to see these more? Now, we'll take this example in the lower left, okay? So we have got some very exciting galaxies here. So these are what are called spiral galaxies and edge-on galaxies. And this particular grouping of galaxies is a cluster of galaxies which I know as M81 and M82. Now, for those of you who are thinking, oh my God, what is this astronomer talking about? But these constellations, or rather the galaxies themselves rather, were catalogued once upon a time by an astronomer also known as Charles Messier. So remember that surname, Messier. What could the clue be here? So we've got M something, so we've got Messier and then a number. And he catalogued his version of deep sky objects within the night sky. And for me, as an astronomer, I think it's the more recognized form of identifying some of the beautiful objects in the heavens. But there are other ways of cataloging some of these deep sky objects, such as NGC and IC and so on. But I'll be honest with you guys, it's a bit heavy going for those who are just starting out. So I'm just going to keep it as basic as I can, remembering how I studied it back when I was 7 years old. So just as a bit of a cover then, that M means Messier, and he catalogued a number of these deep sky objects. So the group which you can see here on the right-hand side of your screens is M81 and M82. And in order to find that, I have to use a bit of imagination here, so work with me if you can. But by taking the two top stars of the saucepan, you can create an uneven triangle in order to find the rough location of M81 and M82. And just for you guys to remember as well, that as my thanks of you guys joining this workshop, if you would like any of these constellation cards, which I've called them, please let me know in the chat with your email address, and I'm more than happy to send a version of these to you, in which you can use in your free time when you have a clear night sky to try finding some of these exciting objects for yourselves. So again, just to reiterate, you can be using this triangle or this irregular shape in relation to the positions of other stars to find this location. I also have some resources as well, which I'll be sharing with you at the end of the program, in case you wish to divulge a little bit further into the heavens. So in the top left, we have a very striking galaxy, which is called M101. And the way I like to find that, as you guys might clearly see on your screens, is using the two stars which make up the tail of Ursa Major, the Big Bear or the Plough. And it forms a nearly equilateral triangle in the night sky. So as long as you've got your distance right when looking at Ursa Major, and you can imagine that equilateral triangle, you will be able to find the rough location of this object, M101, this amazing galaxy. Now, I must admit to you that as best as I've done to make these constellations cards, they're not exactly going to be to scale. So as I've mentioned already, there's some resources which I'll share with you at the end of the talk, to which you can use then to look further into the heavens. And M97, another amazing, what's called a planetary nebula, also known as the Owl's Head Nebula. This is quite a fun one, right? So you have to use, again, a bit of imagination, but if you look, oh no, excuse me. If you look very closely in the center of this very blue, almost pink-like object, we can see some dark perforations. And astronomers like myself always remember this for looking similar to an owl's head. And again, a planetary nebula. This is a very exciting object where it depends on so many things in the world of space and stargazing. But typically, I associate planetary nebulas with supernova. And in doing so, with some of the science going on here, it's the explosion and literally the expansion of debris and gas, molecular gas, which is causing these unusual distortions or areas in space, which we can see using telescopes. So some very interesting things to discuss here, but one of the things which I'll highlight now, as you guys may have cheekily seen in my previous or future slides, is these two stars, which you can see at the very end of the saucepan, we'll call it. And these two are very important because, as you can see in my little tip below, try using the end stars of Ursa Major to find Polaris. Now, what is Polaris? We will find out. So, we have just discussed Ursa Major, and now we're going to discuss Ursa Minor. Now, Ursa Minor, as you guys might be able to guess, is the total opposite of Ursa Major. It is a smaller constellation which resembles Ursa Major, the Great Bear. But as you guys can clearly see on your screens, this is the smaller bear because it is a very similar pattern in shape and design, into which our ancestors used to find the North Star. And as I previously mentioned as well, Polaris is so close to the North Celestial Pole. And again, it was used for purposes of seafaring and navigation. But from an astronomical point of view, like mad people here wanting to look at the night sky, we use it to align our telescopes to the North Celestial Pole so that we can see and track these objects throughout the night sky. So as I mentioned previously in looking at Ursa Major, just using this as an example here, If we take these two stars and we draw a straight line and we keep going until we see the next star, this is how you find Polaris. And once again, Ursa Minor is also used to determine the seasons through its change throughout the night sky during the year, and was partly why farmers were able to tell when was the right time to sow their seeds and also for harvest as well. So you've got to think of astronomy on so many levels, thinking back to our ancient ancestors who once jotted the positions of the sun and the moon along the horizon, really to find our own perception within the universe and to make sense of it as well. So how exciting is that, that we can still relate to these constellations and the fact that they haven't changed in appearance very much since then? How exciting is that? Moving on through the universe, we come to the constellation of Cassiopeia. Now, this constellation is very close to Ursa Major, and you'll be able to see it in the night sky right now, looking nearly towards the east and further on, just above your head. And I've always recognized this constellation as an asymmetrical W. So as a bit of fun here, so we can do some interactive elements, I'd like you guys to hold out your fingers like this, please. Okay, I want you to show patterns with your hands. And there we go. We have literally created a rough shape of what Cassiopeia looks like in the night sky. And you can't miss it either because of this unusual asymmetrical shape, and was one of the first constellations which I learned to observe in the night sky. As you can see, made by 5 asymmetrical stars, we're able to see the distinct shape of Cassiopeia. And as I'll go on mentioning in the talk, that you can also use objects called planispheres, which can be used to find out the rough location of these constellations in the night sky. So once you have found these constellations, you can do so many things with them, like what we have shown with Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. We can see some pretty cool things through a telescope, right? So one of them being my favorite examples in the constellation of Cassiopeia is the Pac-Man Nebula. Now, for some of you who may remember the old version or the old retro game Pac-Man, can you resemble any likeness to the slightly more colorful image in the center of your screens? Because this is quite literally how astronomers remember things, by apparently associating deep sky objects to Pac-Man. So, you know, there's some really fun things to consider here in astronomy. But the most important thing I always like to remember is, if you want to get a bit more serious about this and thinking, oh, right, okay, here's another constellation, what can I do with it? If you want to use a telescope and you want to try your best at seeing these objects, you want to be looking on this right-hand side of Cassiopeia, this asymmetrical W. If we take this star, which is central almost to the center star in Cassiopeia, it's very close by. So as long as you get a rough area in terms of the region of where you're looking, and you scan this area with your telescope, you may be able to see this soft, diffuse glow, which is the Pac-Man Nebula. Now, just as some general sense in making any sense out of astronomy, is that when you see these objects or these images, which I'm presenting to you today, you won't necessarily get that same view through your telescope. And why is that? Because it again depends on so many things. So for example, some of my friends who I know, they have slightly smaller diameter telescopes, whereas some other astronomers I know have massive telescopes. And the reason for this is all to do with light gathering. So the larger the telescope means you're usually able to resolve more details, but bearing in mind some of these images which have been sourced by NASA require long exposure, so astrophotography, in order to combine hours and hours worth of photographic information and stacking the colors, literally the red, green, and blue filters of these images to give us a close representation to the heavens. And some of these objects also have false colour images, like the Pac-Man Nebula in this example. As pretty as it looks, it is a false colour image. And astronomers do this in order to analyse different layers of deep sky objects. And this is all determined on the various gases within these objects, which effectively allows us to look even further into these beautiful objects which we see in the night sky. So the Pac-Man Nebula is pretty obvious. I've told you now, it's a nebula. But we also have on the edge of the screen some star clusters. And the way I always like to try and remember this, guys, if you want to do this for a bit of fun during lockdown, is to create your own star cluster, quite literally. If you were to grab a piece of black card and pinch a little bit of salt or some sugar onto that black card, that is effectively what a star cluster is. It's a compression of stars. And in doing so, we're able to see some absolutely stunning views through telescopes. And you can see various colors of stars, from oranges to blues. And this all depends on their temperatures and all this amazing visual stuff that we can see through telescopes. So there's another one, guys. Remember, Cassiopeia, it looks like a W. Pegasus. Now, we're getting towards some of my more favorite constellations now, but Pegasus is also very important because it's close to Cassiopeia. So as we're hopping around from one constellation to the next, astronomers use what is called star hopping in order to find these exciting objects of the night sky. So we've already been doing that. We've been making sense and perspective of these constellations and trying to find these objects within the night sky in relation to these constellations. So here's a tester. The constellation, also known as the winged horse from Greek mythology, is represented by a large square made by 4 relatively bright stars, which I'll just highlight with my mouse here. So as you can see, the scale of this constellation is quite big in the night sky. So as soon as you can see Cassiopeia, you really can't miss the great square, which is Pegasus. And if you guys have any questions as well after the talk, just in relation to the constellations themselves, please feel free to let me know. But as soon as we have found the great square, which is Pegasus, we can star hop a little, remembering that all of this is the constellation itself, but we can hop from one star to the next, and then to the end of Pegasus. Now, if you imagine using these 2 stars as a pointer, and we take about half that distance, and we apply that again into the vastness of space, we'll be able to find another one of Messier's objects, M15, another amazing globular star cluster. Now, I always find globular star clusters the most exciting because they're much more compressed as opposed to what are called open star clusters, which are a bit more spread apart. Whereas globular clusters are the complete opposite. They're concentrated regions of stars, and if you take it one step further, can be easily visible through telescopes. Now, isn't that a beautiful picture or what? And how do you find this amazing galaxy in the night sky? For those of you who don't know, this is the Andromeda Galaxy, also known as M31 in Charles Messier's list of deep sky objects. And the way we find that is by, again, using Pegasus, which was the great square, remember? And from one corner of Pegasus, going back to my previous slide, this star in the top left is what I call a stream of stars which emanate from that point. And this is the constellation of Andromeda. Now, the daughter of Cassiopeia, as Andromeda is known, is very important in finding this beautiful deep sky object. And the way to do that is to remember by using this star in the upper left of Pegasus, and we hop from one star to the next star. And once you've fixed your bearings on this star, we can hop up again. But when we hop up again, we realize that our eyes are becoming more dark adapted. And if you live in a dark sky place, you may be able to see a little fuzz in the night sky. And if you take it that one step further, and if you use a telescope, you'll be able to see a faint glowing cloud. And would it amaze you to think that if you are looking at this faint little cloud, no, you haven't seen a cloud like you see here in the United Kingdom all the time, but you are looking at an object which is millions of light years away. And this is the Andromeda Galaxy. And you can even see the Andromeda Galaxy by just using your naked eye alone. So again, the main point of tonight's talk is that when you get that clear sky and you look up to the heavens, you don't need to use a telescope. I've mentioned tonight you can use a telescope if you so wish, but you don't need to as well. There's so many objects which you can see. And what is quite funny, actually, I can hear the rain actually bucketing it down outside, so we're quite lucky we're doing this tonight. Right, this is my favourite. Why is it my favourite? Because it's on my Space4All badge. It's here on the screen, the constellation of Orion. And it's so important again because the constellation of Orion is mainly a winter constellation. So through our orbit around the sun and how the Earth rotates, we will see a constellation which is called Orion. Now, something which I find really interesting about this constellation is that when farmers in agriculture would see this constellation rise, they would know that the winter is coming, that winter is on its way, when those hot summer days begin to turn cold as Orion seeps higher into the sky. Now, in this part of the talk, we can begin to talk more about the stars themselves, because as you can see clearly on here, we see two stars with two particular colors. And that is a star in Orion known as Betelgeuse and a slightly bluer star called Rigel. Now, these are two very bright stars which mark the shoulder and almost the hip and the leg of Orion, depending at how you personally observe the constellations yourselves. But if I was to tell you that the color of these stars is dependent on their temperature. Now, for those of you who may remember your chemistry lessons back at school, is that the hotter temperatures are more towards the blue end of the spectrum as opposed to the red. So when you're looking at the star Rigel, you're actually looking at one of the hotter stars within the constellation. And Betelgeuse is actually a little bit cooler in that sense. So already we're going into some science here. We're not going too heavy, but we can see already the physics which is going on here. Something else which I think is important as well in our perception of the universe is that all these stars are not flat within a celestial plane. What I mean by this is that we are purely looking at the constellations from the perspective here on Earth. So if we were to create like a almost three-dimensional view of the constellations, we'd actually see that these stars are at different perspectives and distances to one another. So it's just by their apparent brightness that we're able to see these stars forming the shapes or the asterisms, as they are known, of the major constellations. So just moving on ever so slightly, Orion the Hunter, the swordsman. Most of you will remember or may know of Orion because of its belt. It's one of the more exciting objects to see. And you know why? Because it is home to something called a stellar nursery. What the heck is that? A stellar nursery is a place where stars are being born. Okay, so just to divert your attention with that thought in your mind, I'd like you to take a look at this image in the top left. And this is called the Orion Nebula, also known as M42 and M43, again in Charles Messier's list of deep sky objects. And what we are seeing is this stellar nursery. So the further you look into this nebula, we can see a very bright region, and this is what is called the trapezium, and is so amazing on so many levels because it is the reason why all this coalescing gas, these pink and red colors, are emanating from. And for those of you who are a bit more into your science, a bit more into your astronomy, it's all to do with hydrogen alpha gas, which is spilling out from these portions in space, which are responsible for giving birth to these stars. Now, something else which I find really beautiful to look at and is not far away at all to the Orion Nebula, which is marked by the sword just below Orion's belt, is the Running Man Nebula. So, for those of you who are more artistic and creative in your approach, can you see a man running through the clouds? Maybe. Now, if you're able to look very carefully, you can see a very abstract view of a man running throughout the night sky. So here's his leg, and here's his arm, and he's running like a madman. There's his head, and then his arms stretching off again, and he's running through the clouds. And that's how I always like to remember this deep sky object, is for that reason alone. So it's just a little bit above the Orion Nebula. But again, you'll need some long exposure images or even a slightly larger telescope to resolve this very fragile light. Now, for those of you, I'm pretty sure you have seen this beautiful area in space before, and it's called the Horsehead Nebula. Now, I don't even need to explain it. You can see it there. You can see a silhouette of a horse's head. And what makes it so exciting is the fact that you can see this shape against the backdrop of this excited hydrogen alpha red colored gas. So there's something for you to reflect on, that when you're looking at this star in the left corner of the belt, you're looking very close towards the Horsehead Nebula. How weird is that? Gemini, the twins. I love these constellations. It's like a couple holding their hands throughout the night sky. Again, very closely positioned towards Orion, just a little bit to top right region of where Orion's located. But again, we can find some beautiful objects. Just for example, the Jellyfish Nebula, this image below, which we can see very loosely as a jellyfish-like structure found in the legs of the right twin. So again, when you're star hopping about and you think, there we go, we can just about begin to see the stars Castor and Pollux, we can see the head, two heads of the twins, which are holding their hands together throughout the night sky. And when you're beginning to realize the shapes of these stars in relation to one another, we can find objects like the Eskimo Nebula, and we can take the distances between the arms and the legs to find M35, a loose open star cluster emanating from these blue stars. It's such a beautiful sight to see for a telescope. It's amazing. Now, constellation Taurus, very close towards Orion, just a bit more to the top right region of where we can find the winter constellation of Orion, which is known as the Bull. And we can find some characteristic deep sky objects by the relationship of looking at the bright orange star known as Aldebaran. And so very easily between what I like to call this little dip here of Taurus itself, we're able to star hop from one star, and then using what's known as averted vision, which is using that slightly more sensitive part of your eye, we can resolve a fuzzy patch. And that fuzzy patch, if we jump along, you'll easily see it with your eyes, is the Pleiades star cluster, known as the Seven Sisters. So it's, again, one of these open star clusters, which is passing through some emanating blue gas and looks stunning through the eyepiece of a telescope. Again, going back to Aldebaran, and we jump to the nearest star right at the end of the constellation, we find another really interesting deep sky object known as the Crab Nebula. Now, if any of you guys happen to go down to the coast and say, hey, let's have a crab sandwich, and you see the shape of a crab and you look at it and you begin to realize this in relationship to this beautiful picture, which we can see right here from NASA, that is one of the reasons why it's given this unusual relationship to the crab, and is again the remnants of a supernova. So some Chinese astronomers, which I won't be able to relate to exactly just now, were able to witness a supernova visible in daylight. And we can see the result of that by using the stars to find Crab Nebula, also known as M1. So I have just shown you 8 of some of the most easy to recognize constellations. Now, I think it's so important to remember that you need, I think personally, to really begin to learn the basic constellations to find the more difficult ones. So I purposefully haven't included those in this talk because I wanted to keep it as basic as I possibly could. But if you're feeling a bit more inspired and you go off your little tick list, and we've gone through all of the constellations which we've seen tonight, then if you want to take it to the next level, take a screen grab of this page right here. These are some of the books I used as a youngster, and they were able to help me understand more about the night sky in relationship to the heavens and how we find some of those slightly dimmer constellations to find, again, some more exciting objects of the night sky. So Philips this year are doing a really good 2021 stargazing month by month guide, so we can see the changing pattern of the constellations throughout the seasons, by Heather Cooper and Nigel Hembest, and also a book by DK Nature Guide, which is a book I've still got here, called Stars and Planets. And this was literally my Bible for astronomy, and it teaches you so many things, and which you can go over again and learn more about in your own time during lockdown. So please take a note. If you guys want to just make a note of that now very quickly. And then we'll go to the next slide. Now, if you want to go into some of the more complicated or rather serious constellations, I also think that astronomy software is such a useful place to start, because you can create what is called a virtual planetarium. And this is some really exciting software which astronomers like myself can use to find objects within the night sky. So again, you can be teaching yourself how to find some of the more complicated constellations of the night sky. So I can personally recommend using Stellarium, which is a free, and I'll quote, a free piece of astronomy software which you can use online. I believe you can also purchase a paid-for version, which is a bit more elaborated on the free edition available online. But one which I also used to use when I was a youngster was Starry Night Pro. It's a bit more expensive, but in terms of visual content, it's a step up on Stellarium, but this is for the more serious and avid astronomer. Planispheres, I've been talking about this all night. So planispheres really are used to help us understand how the positions of the constellations change throughout the year. So you're presented with a little disc, and you could rotate that disc to meet the month of the year in which you're observing. And as you can see around the edge of this disc here, we see numbers. And this is all dependent on how many days there are in that given month. So very simply, you turn it to the day in which you're observing, and that is the view you will be getting of the night sky. So again, I think amazing piece of astronomy equipment to use, a good accessory to have when you're doing your stargazing, and that will teach you how to observe some of those objects on a clear night. So moving on, so I just wanted to say really that that's the end of my main talk for this evening. But I also just wanted to say to all of you who have put up with me throughout my first talk, just to say thank you very much for watching this presentation today, because, you know, I think this is such an important feature to be looking on during lockdown, because we can all be looking up at the stars. So to reflect that in the year 2021, this is my virtual calendar ahead of the new year. So we have covered the constellations this evening, and next month on Thursday, the 25th of February, at the same time at 7 o'clock, we will be looking at the planets. So just to cover some of the other themes, we'll hopefully be looking at the moon, some of the deep sky objects, which I may have already discussed in this talk, but to cover in future workshops. Celestial events, which are some of my favorites, including eclipses, the sun, how to take images of the night sky with astrophotography. So hopefully linking up other cameras with Zoom in order to show you real live views of these cool things. And then also again covering my night sky conservation work and what I do as an active delegate of the International Dark Sky Association. But most importantly, once we become more elaborated in our awareness of the night sky, I will then teach you how to use binoculars and telescopes. And again, guys, all of this depends on the situation and how we see the night sky, or rather the global pandemic, which we are currently faced with. So as I've mentioned at the bottom of this calendar, all these events will be subject to change if and when current lockdown restrictions are eased and if it is safe for us to meet once again. So this plan may change at any time, but we can only hope that the vaccinations will be rolling out soon. So I hope that's the case. But just to say, if you guys would like some constellation cards for you to take away, I can send you some digital versions of those. So all I ask is if you could send an email, please, to joshduryphotomedia@gmail.com or space4alluk@gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to give you not only the calendar, but also a copy of some of those constellations which we have learnt this evening. So just to remember as well, guys, please spread the word, because this is how it's going to work to get as many of us interested in the night sky. So please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and Instagram at Space4All UK. And I'll also hope to be storing some of these workshops on YouTube and Facebook as well. So that will all be in the loop as well. And if you haven't already, guys, please leave a like on the Space4All Facebook page. That'd be much appreciated. And just to remember as well, I have some YouTube videos as well that you can watch in your spare time, just to cover over some of those constellations which we have looked at tonight. So I hope to be launching a series of these videos as soon as we get a clearer night sky. So we're hoping on that. So it's come to that point now in the chat. So we have got a couple of questions. So let's have a look. Just scrolling on through. Just to appreciate, thank you very much for everyone's very kind comments. Has anybody got any questions at all? Is there something which you guys would like covered, or would anybody like to unmute themselves to ask a question at all? If you just want to leave a quick little mention in the chat.
Hi, Josh. Yeah, I just wanted you to talk about dark skies. Sometimes it's difficult for some of us to get to a dark sky area. I live in Wells.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, how effective it's going to be to see things in my back garden when I've got street lighting all around. I mean, I've been in the garden, I've tried looking up. Some nights it's pretty clear. Is there anything I can do to improve the situation? A cowling, a hood, or do you look at stuff from inside a shed and set up inside a shed? Does that help, looking out, something like that?
Okay, so some of the things which I might be able to suggest is that but the best thing I can suggest is, from astronomers who I know have the same situation as yourself, Steve, is that try and go to the darkest part of your garden. I know it sounds ridiculous, I know, considering that you've just mentioned to me that you have street lighting, which again is one of those situations in relation to astronomy, but try and find the darkest part of your garden. If you can't do that, you can try and shield the light, and it sounds ridiculous, I've done it before, but just have an umbrella outside, just mask that light and just try and look up to the night sky and see what view that gives you. But if you're a resident to Wells, some other places I can recommend having a look is around Wells Cathedral Green. That's quite a view there near to Wells and Mendip Museum. Has a good, not the darkest of skies, but enough to see some of those major constellations which we have discussed this evening. But other locals relative to the city of Wells, even if you drive to the top of the Mendip Hills and you go to places like Dury, even Charterhouse as well, a place which I love so much because it's got a brilliant observatory up there, some really dark skies. So if you want to get a bit more like serious with astronomy, it may even mean that you may have to go towards some dark sky places. But as long as you take the precautions in this situation, which is try and find somewhere dark in your backyard, or even to use an umbrella, or even just to try and look at the stars for a slightly darker place to increase that contrast. That's the most important thing, to increase the contrast of these objects so that you're able to see them in the night sky. Has that answered your question, Steve?
Yeah, that's good actually. But the place that you're talking about is up near Velvet Bottom, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah.
Who's that available to? Can you rent it? Can you could we have a meeting there or something? Or
you could, however, there's a few precautions, because I always like to say when doing astronomy at these places, always go as a group, please, because it's so important to remember that, if you're doing astronomy by yourself, always go in good company for obvious reasons, which I won't mention, but always try and go in a group. So even if lockdown restrictions are eased, I'd love to do events like that, and literally to get a good group of us, 10 or 20 astronomers together. And I'd say that's good enough, really, to just safety in numbers in groups.
Do they rent it out then? Is it available for?
Not so much, but it's more like it is mainly public land up around there. But again, there's places which I've seen on top of the Mendips where you can rent land if you need to. But at this moment in time, the one thing I can say is that these public open areas like Dearly, Velvet Bottom, the car parks there, they're dark sky places, but just please go as a group or with relatives, your friends, your family. Just stay as a group if you're going to partake in these activities.
Yeah, I was talking about the observatory itself that's up there in that.
Observatory itself. Well, funny enough, one of the chaps from Wells and Mendip Astronomers, Hugh Allen's on the chat. So hello. I used to go to some of these astronomy events at Charterhouse, to which it is rented space, yes. And I'd like to do a bit more of that to really get the opportunity to use that telescope again. But it is mainly rented, and there's a few other implications as well. But yes, potentially so.
That'd be good.
Brilliant.
Yeah, just to say hi, Josh. It's really good to see you again after all the great things you did for us at Wells and Mendip Astronomers. But you know, just to comment on Steve's point about light polluted skies and seeing the constellations. The funny thing is, I've actually found if you're in a very dark sky, it's quite difficult to pick out the constellations, isn't it? Because there are so many stars.
Yeah.
So it's easier to pick out the constellations when there's a little bit of light pollution.
I'll tell you what, Hugh, this is so true. And I think a very important aspect for everyone to take from this evening is the fact that when you go to some of these dark sky places, whether that's Exmoor, Brecon, some of the more local dark sky sites, that when you get a good night, when there's no moon visible in the night sky, there are so many stars that you can't even recognize some of these major constellations because there's just so many stars, and you can see the Milky Way galaxy stretching overhead. So even then, you have to train your eye and really get to know the constellations well to think, oh my goodness, that's the constellations. But yeah, Hugh's very true there in saying that actually, when you go to a dark place, the amount of stars makes it sometimes difficult to see them. So thank you for your comment there, Hugh, much appreciated. So is there anybody else you'd like to ask questions? We've got one from, yes, from Lily. Even if it was clear tonight, the full moon is up. Very true, Lily, I have to admit. This also makes viewing the night sky a bit more tricky when you're near to full moon, because light reflecting off the sun bounces back to Earth and reduces this contrast of the night sky. So just as some concluding remarks, looking at the moon, brilliant. Have a look now when you get that clear sky. But if you want to look deeper into the heavens, try and look around new moon, because this is when sunlight will be on the opposite side of the moon and closer towards the sun, where we'll be able to get those important hours of darkness. So I hope that helps everybody understand that situation as well.
I think Karen asked a question at the beginning of the chat.
Yes. Let's have a look a minute. Just try and find Karen.
Quite an interesting one.
Yes, I do. Can you see M101 with binoculars? Good question. I'd probably say yes to that one, because it again depends on the size of your binoculars. So for those of you who are orientated into wildlife conservation and nature, a good decent sized pair of binoculars should do the trick. Again, it's got to be dark with no moon, so you've got to try and work out where the lunar calendar is at the minute and what phases to look out for, which I'll discuss in my next talk. But again, you should be able to see a fuzzy patch. So you won't necessarily see these NASA-like structures, which you see from their images of hours of processed images, but you'll definitely see a fuzzy patch. And when you're looking at that faint light, which has traveled through space, you'll be looking at the light of M101. So here we go. Yes, Richard, yes, this recording will be available as a presentation. So what I've done is all throughout, I've been recording this video and will hopefully upload this online for anybody who hasn't been able to watch this evening, and has also been streaming on YouTube and Facebook for anybody else who might wish to watch as well. A quick question from Phil Brook. How worried are you about the Starlink satellite chain? I am very worried. So for those of you who don't know, that Starlink is a project which is being launched by SpaceX's Elon Musk, with the intentions of launching 12,000 satellites by the year 2025, with an extension to 42,000 satellites by federal law in the year 2025. And it does concern me, because on average, and this is the same for my friends down in South America, but we on average can see 4,000 visible stars to the unaided eye. And if you can imagine 42,000 satellites doing this, moving across the night sky and doing this as well, it is quite concerning. But in some talks with the Dark Sky Association, we have been in touch with SpaceX as an organization and currently mitigating with them in order to protect the conservation of the dark skies, but also for how this technology can advance without impacting professional astronomical observations. So there's a lot of things which ride on our open window to the universe and how we're going to see it as well. So there's already been a launch earlier this month, another 60 gone up. So already, yeah, it is great concern, Phil, basically, it is. So I think, how are we doing for time, guys? Just so I'm aware. So we're 3 minutes over. So I just wanted to say to everybody, look, thank you so much for joining this first virtual online workshop for Space4All. If any of you guys might know of anybody with just a casual interest in the night sky, please let them know and join in with these workshops, because we'll try and do some more creative, inspiring ideas as the talks go on, and try and keep us all connected through the stars in the coming weeks and months. So yes, I think that's the way we'll go forward until lockdown restrictions are eased, to raise public awareness of light pollution, but also how we observe the night sky. So I just want to say, really, it's been lovely seeing all of your faces. Thank you for supporting me as always, friends old and new. And so next month we will be discussing the planets and how to observe some of them, like the planet Mars, Jupiter and Saturn. So as long as we get a clear sky, I'll try and show you it in real time. But for now, we need to wait for the cloud, rain, snow, whatever that may be, to clear away. And I'll be able to show you a nice clear night sky. So hopefully, fingers crossed, until next time. But just again, guys, I'll end the call here for now. But just to say thank you very much for supporting me with this workshop. And just to wish you all clear skies and all the best. And thank you,
Josh.
Thank you very much, Josh.
Pleasure, not a problem. Lovely to meet all of you, and thank you for joining.
Cheers.
Thanks, Josh.
Cheers.
Thanks, Josh.